Hey, what's going on? So this is going to be the third video. Um, Basically just going to be going through everything we've gone through in the past couple of videos, but this time I got the notes. Um, so yeah, this is the first one, right? This January campaign. This is what we did in January here. It's like week, give or take, almost like a sample campaign, right? Taking $100 and doubling it. And so, as I'm doing this, as I'm going through this on the computer, I also got my iPad open with Notability, which I really like. And I'm just writing this out with like the draw function. So, I'm literally just finger on the iPad scribbling this, right? So this little summary here, right? But either way, opened up this new page for Notability, right? What's the goal? Doubling money, taking stress-free bets. Then I was considering potentially putting it into DraftKings stock. That's not financial advice, right? But that was where my head was at the end of the day. I did buy some DraftKings stock this year and I sold it, and I did end up taking a loss. I don't remember what it was. I mean, it was marginal, honestly, but yeah, kind of fascinating either way. But really coming from this perspective, right? Okay, before I even begin, I'm framing in my mind like a 10-day campaign. So I'm entering all these bets with that in mind, right? So really, how can you sustain that campaign instead of trying to um, do as much as possible in like a handful of bets. So I think that's really sort of like this campaign mentality is the um, like the mirror opposite of the retail gambler mentality, right? The average person engaging with DraftKings. So just something to think about. First bet here, right? Just trying to make it just kind of better. Let's see here. Yeah, I like that. Like being able to see both of it. Yeah, either way, right? This first bet, I kind of like to denote with like the beginning and the end, right? So I'll like go on these runs, like the day's activity, you know what I mean? And then I'll end it with the end, right? So starting with the beginning and the end, and like knowing that like okay, that is that day's activity, you know? We had like 10 days of activity on the 22nd here, or excuse me, 10 days of activity, literally like 10 minutes, right? That was all I did on that day. It was like a 9-minute bet. And so being able to know like okay, once I'm done, I'm done on the way throughout this 10-day campaign, right? So having those little like, those little spurts within those days, within specific hours, etc. Being able to define that beginning and the end for yourself, I think is crucial. And really it's like it's a psychological framing. And obviously it's like a, series of activity that you're taking and telling yourself no to a certain extent, right? But the way that it's framing in my mind is so um it's so non-emotional. And I mean, like this might not work for everybody or whatever, but what this is for me is the personal technique to stay in a focused mind when engaging with like the lunacy of DraftKings. DraftKings is an online casino in the way that a in real person casino essentially tries to induce impulse in you, or essentially gets you to try and drop your guard, right? DraftKings is doing that same thing, but in the online sphere, and really all they can do as far as that goes is like it's it's in the visual medium, it's in the way that the website is literally presented to you. Um, so yeah, something else to think about. But either way, we'll just kind of get into this, right? This first bet here, $100. I'll read this out. I know my handwriting is kind of wacky. Um, $100 on Marquinhos, right? But you'll see it's the same thing, man, right? So first we looked at the results in the first video. Second video, we looked at like the overall situation. Third video, we're going in depth on the situation, right? And as we go through these different situations, right, these different soccer situations, you'll see patterns within this pattern. So bet one here, $100 on Marquinhos to hold the 3-2 lead with 87:13 left in the second half, right? So all that is in here, right? I engage in the bet, and then I like immediately write this up, right? And so like obviously according to the DraftKings third party log, like the bet actually occurred at 2:47. I begin writing this at 2:48. So in my mind, it's like I began the bet at 2:48, right? So you'll see some slight discrepancies there. It doesn't tell you exactly when you engage. At the same time, too, though, personally, like collecting data going into next year, um, I want to be able to like have that in real time as well, like being able to know what time I engage, being able to look at the clock, right? So that could be something worth mentioning. But either way, I say, like what bet of the campaign it is, what's the overall situation, basically like a version of the, like this bet summary. What are the odds? What's the payout, right? It's not like the bet is paying 115, but like what's the anticipated um, account balance post bet, right? That's really where my head's at. So, and then I write an intra bet reflection, and it's essentially like it could range from just like psychological coaching through the bet to like literally collect data on what happens um, as you go through the situation, right? And so, okay, I enter into the bet, and then I literally just watch DraftKings. And this is what I say: is I've sat, the odds rose from negative 550 to 650, and then I entered. Then it rose to negative 800, now sitting at negative 1100 to 2500 to 3500. At 256, it became 20,000. So either way, really all I'm saying there is like that's sort of a confirmation that this thing is going to become more and more likely to pan out in the future. And so at the same time too, as I, technically before I enter into the bet, I'm looking for a rising of the odds. And so, as that like I'm basically anticipating that the odds go up in terms of the return on capital going down throughout time as this game, ends, right? As we go from 857 to the end of the game. So like as return on capital is going down and as certainty rises, what is that ideal point within that like, finalized chunk of time to enter without, where like return on capital is essentially, would you want to enter into a negative 20,000, odds? And that's not even necessarily wrong. I did that a few times, in March. We'll get into that, but um, something to consider, right? And so it's like I'm looking for that as well. I'm looking to see like a rising of the odds before I get into this situation. And then simultaneously after I enter, I'm looking to see continual rising of the odds. And so that could even be an additional entry opportunity depending on your conviction, right? Simultaneously, what is the point where the return on capital becomes too low? So post bet reflection, right? Just giving myself that little, again, this little summary, right? I liked how late in the game it was. It was reassuring to watch the odds stretch away after the bet was placed. So that's like all I do on that day. So this day, I'm not going to read all of this, but I was watching the Quimper Challenger game, right, between this dude and this dude, and I'm basically just like studying the game. Simultaneously, potentially like backing or fading different countries. And so I was thinking about that with France, right? Simultaneously, okay, so like one of the commentators was like, there's guaranteed to be, excuse me, I can't even speak, guaranteed to be one French finalist. So watching that as well, kind of just fascinating, right? Like, could you just watch games for data as its own thought, right? That was really where my head was at. But either way, bet two eventually happens later in that same day, right? Here with Herbert, right? $115 placed on Herbert to close out the 1-4 lead. Technically like 4-1 lead, right? Depending on how you look at it, either way. That's how it was displayed on the screen. Negative 2,500 odds pays 119.99, right? So again, that's not the payment, that's the anticipated, account balance post bet. So in true bet reflection, as I sit here, I'm confident in my decision, especially watching the odds shoot up to negative 50,000. I mean, no shit, right? Like that's solid. Um, Simultaneously, though, it's interesting to watch how. Well, okay, let's just read, right? So we place a bet on Herbert, you know, at 11:20, 5 minutes later, right? I mean, this is pretty self-explanatory as time goes on and make these different observations. But whoever's opponent was D, right, makes it negative or makes it 2-5. I'm calm and indifferent. With such a lead, it's natural D might win a game or two before H wins the match, right? So that's sort of something that could be anticipated within a tennis situation is like, okay, this dude's coming back slightly. DraftKings might even open the book back up. Okay, bam, hit it again, right? Because it's natural that whoever this, like the person lagging might win a few games before the winner, in this case, Herbert, closes it out, right? So that could be its own situation. Again, post bet reflection, right? I liked how sizable the lead was. I wasn't phased when D made it 2-5 and was reassured seeing the book odds grow exponentially. So yeah, again, right? What do I say here? 12-18, same bit, casually watching blank versus blank first set. If one player shows dominance and puts in a lead, I might engage similar to the last bet, scooping up a bet as the book odds run away, signaling a winner. Thinking about this also, just kind of curious, if you set up slash snipe odds correctly, you could make money no matter who wins. That is potentially true. I don't really even know what to think about that, but right here at 342, if he continues to lead and show momentum, I'd be willing to place a bet, right? Bam, up 4-0. I'll enter if book gives me an opportunity. If not, it's okay. Bam. That's literally how I read that. It's obviously oh, yeah, this dude, right? So simultaneously here, right? I'm watching this game. I put a decent amount of time into watching this game. Uh, where are we at? 340, right? I mean, not a, that was what, like 20 minutes. And it kind of just runs away from us, right? Are you okay with that? Are you going to freak out? Or are you just, okay, that's just like a passive opportunity, right? Treating it like its own exercise, its own like observation exercise. You still got the opportunity to like do the observation exercise instead of um, like not watching in the first place as well. So very fascinating. 604 watching the book between Portland Blazers, right, and Hornets. 640 in the fourth. Portland up by 7 with 640 to go. If Portland goes up 10, I'll place a bet, right? And so this is our third bet. Bet three. Introvert reflection. Closing my eyes and slowing down heart rate. Basically just meditating. Closing out of DraftKings until 6:30. So giving myself those like defined stay away from the computer times, right? Closing out the account or closing the account balance to close out the day, right? 128.16 or 128.26. Next day, 349. Watching book Liberia versus Gualipe's. G for Gualip or Guapiles, right? Favored negative 750 to negative 900 at the 89th. Bet four, right? As I sit in the bet, I don't feel emotional. I'm fairly confident in this high probability bet. 357 the win, right? So again, seeing that rising of the odds, the negative 752, negative 900 at the 89th. And obviously in this like, reflection here, I don't talk about what we saw in that first bet, if I remember correctly. The way that the odds rose and then we enter and then they continue to rise, like that obviously happened, but I didn't talk about it. So again, like just that example of like this same situation, right? So yeah, there's that final bet of the day. Count balance runs up to 116. Oh wait, I actually didn't talk about this one. My bad. This is that Guapiles bet right at the 89th minute, 125, right? I liked how short this bet was time wise. I practiced great conviction with this bet, right? A 6 minute bet, very nice, right? 10 minutes later or so, watching Celtics versus Mavs. Celtics are up. Celtics are up. I mean, that's it said Celtic, but 7-4 left in the third. If still available and favorable, I'll be betting during the fourth quarter. With a 16-point lead, the odds showed up to negative 4,000. If it goes below negative 2,000, I'll hit it. At this point, a Boston victory is imminent. It's really about sniping the book. At this point, odds have shot up to negative 10,000. So again, like missed opportunity, potentially could have hit it earlier. You know what I'm saying? Maybe should have just hit it immediately, right? At the negative 4,000. But again, it's very cool to have these observations, these like in real time notes, right? So again, a couple hours later, 423 to 621, right? As its own sort of perspective. How do you approach the day? Having those little, just little like breaks, man. Give yourself psychological breaks and like literal breaks. Get off the computer, get out of the chair, etc. A couple hours later, right? Just bet on Magic to win with 10 minutes left in the fourth with a 5 point lead. 100% on Magic, right? Tire count. 9:20 left in the fourth. Negative 660, kind of, breaking away from, potential, 10-point lead, binary execution, right? Closed out DraftKings and am convicted. I'll open it up to see. I'll open it back up at 645. I pulled the trigger because the Magic were at score 88 with negative 660 odds. Seems pretty magical to me, which is kind of cringe, but that's literally why I took the bet. So I like the numerology of this bet. I practice great conviction with this bet. So there's that post account or post bet account balance, right? Next day, 126. No bets taken, just watching a little bit, right? Whatever. 127 here at 10:55. Whole account on Haras El Hadoud to win in the 93rd in the second half, negative 2,000 odds. I appreciate how quickly the odds rose from negative 2,000 to negative 4,000, right? So again, just sort of noting like saw the odds rise post bet. 4 minutes later, the cash out is suspended as screen displays 96.54. Also fascinating as well, like the cash out feature that's offered. Um, while the extra time / game length was longer than anticipated, I appreciated my poise during this bet. Right, this ended up being like an 8 minute bet. I basically just assumed it would be like 2 or 3 minutes or something like that because we were already basically in like the 94th minute, right, of overtime. Um, so yeah, pretty fascinating. Right, next day, 128 here. Just watching, right? Watching List versus Martic. List is favored, but List is favored, but Martic obviously ends up winning, and that's who we end up betting on. But it's the first set. I'll check back in during the second set. 30 minutes later, Martic is up 5-3 in the first set. List seems to have her swagger back, right? Not a very objective observation, but it is sort of a subjective, qualitative observation you can make about these players. And it is fascinating to see how, like, that can potentially lead to some type of, or yeah, like basically that could be some type of signal, depending on your conviction. So either way, obviously, just watching, just noting that, right? So pretty fascinating, right? It's like, an hour and a half later, right? From 9:30 to essentially, well, an hour and 50 minutes later, or no, an hour and 20 minutes late. Can't even do public math, bro. 2 hours and like 20 minutes later, right? From 9:30 to like 11:50. So basically, like 2 hours later, we then get in, right? And so it's like, could you get this early game perspective of these players? What's going on? How are they performing this specific day? And then like checking back in essentially later, right? Very nice being able to snipe that within that, 1 minute here. I was patient during this game, placing a quick high probability bet. So to me personally, this is worth, like, if you could just hang around for that quick strike versus, potentially just betting at 9:30 and writing out like a 2 hour bet. Um, I personally prefer the former. I prefer these little uh, short time frame bets, lower return on capital, and just being able to do that over and over and over. Count balance, right? 178.04. On to more observations. Was watching this game that basically just, didn't do anything else. Final day November here. Engaged right at 9:04 a.m. Pretty confident in this bet. I don't have much stress. Once this bet wraps up, I'll be putting together a review of campaign one. And so sort of knowing like, okay, the campaign is basically done. We set out on the campaign knowing we're going to wrap up the first day of February. It's the last day of January, let's just call it. Like, that's solid, right? There's nothing wrong with that at all. So either way, 9:04 getting in the bet, 9:08 cash out is suspended, then turned back on. Kind of fascinating. And then they win. So yeah, I was patient during this game, placing a quick high probability bet. Very nice. So yeah, that's that first campaign. Now it's on to March. Did activity in February, right? This was like a 5 hour run here. And then the next day did a handful of hours as well. So like sort of like an 8 hour perspective. Just going on like a quick 8 hour campaign. But I didn't take notes. So yeah, that's why we're skipping that. But this did happen again, right? So either way, on to March here. March 4th. Going down to March. Starting off with that $50, right? So again, another sample campaign, nothing crazy. Looking for this perspective here. What do I say, right? Tactic -3,000 plus money line run up. So anything above three. I mean, that was where my head was at when I started, right? That could be its own perspective. Like basically just looking for those little 3% returns. That's what this equates to. Engaging in a -3,000 odds is you're looking to get a 3% return on the capital that you're investing. So Yeah. Either way, bet one negative 3,500, right, on lead two at 456, pay out at 458, right? And so, I kind of have this more like compressed summary or perspective or notes or whatever here. So either way, having won the first set 6-4, she was up 5-2 and took the final game handily. So yeah, very nice. Bet two, negative 3,500 on Hugo Gaston. Having won the first set 6-0, I pulled the trigger as he's up 3-0 and is now up 4-0. That's ideal, right? We were talking about this in the second, the second video, but just this concept of like what's going on within this game and all the options, all the results that could be offered in a tennis game. So this dude's up in the first, right? He absolutely dominated. He literally dominated, right? 6-0. Second set, he's also dominating. DraftKings is still offering the odds. Very interesting, right? So like two things could happen from this, right? He could, continue to do what he does here after, like post bet, if you will. And or right, so that's like tree one, right? He just continues the momentum that he's shown in the first set and it closes it out like fairly quickly. I mean, for him to like win, essentially to like finish up his 4-0 lead in like 13 minutes. That's pretty quick when you think about tennis, right? It's not like crazy quick, but it's like pretty quick. And so that's really what we're looking for. As he's up, he's showing this momentum in the second set as well. This is another scenario that could present itself as basically like the opponent fights back, right? And so that could either be like its own entry opportunity because you could see the potential for the second set to still, pan out for Gaston. And seeing that like momentary, like potentially, he's up 4-0, opponent makes it 4-2, hitting it at that point, right? And then he closes it out 6-2 or even 6-3 or something, right? Like that's it could be something like that, or it could lead into that, second set loss, and then he sweeps it in the third, right? And so its own situation, its own perspective, but like when you see the notes and you see the what was happening in the game, I see them as just like more entry opportunities. So, or potentially more like risk management opportunities, really. But either way, right, wrapping up on that first day, nothing crazy. Capital 52, right? Count balance post bet, right? On to the next day, 3-5 and 10:45, right? Negative 2,500 on Polina Yorniak to win the second set. She won first set 6-2, pulled the trigger. She's up 4-2 in the second set. So again, same situation, right? Engaging in the bet at 10:47 and making these notes, right? So 10 minutes later, coming back, it's 4-3. Polina leads. Curious how odds fluctuate. 10:59, negative 525 in favor of P, right? In favor of Paulina. She is down 30-40. At 11, negative 475. Paulina second set becomes 4-4. At 11:02, a couple minutes later, she's now up 30-0. Odds shoot up to negative 900, up to 40-0, up to negative 1,200, then negative 1,400, and she's up 5-4. And then she wins 8 minutes later. And so it's like, you know, for, dude, call it 10 minutes, right? Call it 15 from 10:45 to 11. Like she's up, and then she kind of just like backs off. I mean, that's like, or at least that's how the game rhythm goes, right? She's like in this peak, carving out the lead. She seems to give up some type of momentum as like recovery, intra game, intra set, to then have the energy to close it out, right? From 11 to 11:10. And so that is fascinating. It's also fascinating how there's like, this was like a 20-minute bet. And there's like these two 10-minute windows in this as well. And like the way that the game literally panned out. So that in and of itself is pretty fascinating. On to the next one here with Sofia Kenin, right? Begin, account balance, post bet. This is obviously kind of chopped weird because I'm doing this on the iPad and then it translated onto the Mac here. So that's not like at the top of the thing when I write. It's like this is the start of the new day. So either way. 12-12, negative 20,000, right? She won the first set, 6-2, up 40-15 in a 3-1 lead when I pulled the trigger. So I'm really looking for that, like, essentially, I mean, this just kind of seems like a sure thing, right? And like, I'm in this bet, I engage in this bet. And then simultaneously, I engage in this bet, right? Well, that's actually not true. This bet happens, and then I engage in this one immediately after, right? At 12:20. Okay, so there's like another very, very low return on capital, dude. I don't even know what that is. Like, what percentage of, you know, what percentage of 54 is 27 cents? Like, nothing, dude. Not even like 1%. It's literally like half a percent, right? And then this is almost like 0.25 of a percent. So just like running these two really quick, bang, bang, doubling down, right? Negative 50,000 on Polina, different, right? One first set, 6-4, up 5-0, and I pulled the trigger. And then so we enter we enter at 12:30. Right, again, that's kind of just that, like the cutoff makes it look wonky, but either way, we enter at 12:30. Those negative 50,000 odds. She won the first set 6-4, up 5-0, and I pulled the trigger, right? And then like 10 minutes later, 15 minutes later, the game is now 5-2. And so really like, sort of desensitizing myself from taking action on that opportunity is its own situation, right? And it's doubling down, like putting more cash into the account, right? Did that a handful of times here. Doing that $10 double down, and she has a 5-2 lead slash advantage. Very quick too, right? 12:42 to 12:45. So that is its own situation within this bet, right? On to bet six, putting an additional $10 in the account to essentially take like a more risky bet. Negative 275 on Brooksby here. So Brooksby showing nice momentum up 5-4 and essentially just fading the other player. Again, kind of chopped off, right? We see that like 20-minute bet. Wrapping up at, 140 here. Really 139 though. So on to the next day here, bet seven. Quentin Hayes to win the second set. Quentin Hayes won the first set 6-3, up 4-1. When I pulled the trigger, this game is delayed until tomorrow due to rain. So that was its own situation, right? Literally like it was more like a freaking 24-hour bet, right? Hayes plays out, or Hallis, maybe. Hallis plays Alcaraz tomorrow, anticipating an Alcaraz win. And so I, might have even been like watching, whatever tournament this was or watching this tournament or whatever, and just sort of like, basically just, dude, what's the schedule? What's the activity schedule, right? And then 3-8 next day. Negative 2,500 on Maria Garcia in the second set, 6-1, up 4-2 in the third, right? Nothing crazy. Not a whole lot of observations either. Trying to figure out where this. Uh, for some reason, I was reading this as Alcaraz. Sometimes, well, obviously, obviously I can't even read. Ninth bet here. Alaves holds the 1-0 lead with 102.55 in the second half. So again, like as late as possible. Pretty fascinating. Ends up being that 4-minute bet. Obviously, like the odds showing that, like the odds haven't risen significantly, so this isn't as much of a sure thing, right? Bet 10 here. Negative 3,000 on Fritz to won the first set 6-3, up 3-2, and I pulled the trigger. So very fascinating. Um, but Fritz he was so favored in this game, I could have engaged earlier. So yeah, very fascinating as its own situation, right? We were talking about that concept of like return on capital going down, certainty going up throughout a defined, period of time, and like understanding the matchup, understanding whoever, Fritz versus whoever the opponent was. Fritz was so favored that potentially you could have just hit the trade earlier or hit the bet earlier. That's kind of what we do with Alcaraz here, right? We were like scouting out the game, anticipating an Alcaraz win, sort of like knowing, okay, like if the timing lines up, I want to hit this bet, right? And so that's where we see like, that hour long bet because it's a sure thing with Alcaraz here. It's a sure thing with Fritz here. Could have hit it earlier potentially. So not to, think about there. On to the Alcaraz bet, negative 1,400 on Alcaraz to win against Hallis. Hallis won the first set of the first set, or excuse me, the first game of the first set. Alcaraz is heavily favored. With this fact, I see wins by Hallis as entry opportunities. So could you just, build a position, build a position, build a position, build a position within a game as like a single, like just sort of like a mega opportunity, right? Not financial advice, right? Obviously, there's like risk management there. Um, but yeah, something to consider. So on to the next one here. Negative 1,200 on Coco Gauff to win the tiebreaker, up 5-2 in tiebreaker when I pulled the trigger, right? And so the fact that this was even offered is fascinating. Um, but yeah, like very quick bet. Very nice. Bet 13 here. Negative 2,000 on Samsonova to win. Nothing to say about that really. I don't even know what happened here. On to the next day, 310. Taking a couple days off really, right? Negative 5,000 on Alex Bernard to win. One first set up 6-4. Up 3-0 at deuce when I pulled the trigger, right? At that 40-40 tie inter game. And so, obviously he's up 3-0 at deuce. He probably pulls it to 4-0 and then closes the game out in 8 minutes. So again, it's like when these tennis players are showing that momentum and they're showing that dominance, they pretty much like wrap it up quickly. If that doesn't present itself, however, how could the like struggle by the opponent be seen as entry opportunities in favor of the leader, right? Bet 15 here, 1,100 on St. Johnstone to hold the 1-0 lead. Pulled the trigger at the 86th after watching odds rise from negative 1,000 to negative 1,100. 7-minute bet, right? Nothing to say there. Negative 1800 on Newcastle to hold the 1-0 lead. Next bet, right? Pulled the trigger at the 87th after watching the odds rise from negative 14. This should actually say from negative 1200 to 1400, right? And then entered at negative 1800. And so it's like on the way up to 1800. What was the offering before that? After 1800, what's the offering after that, right? $3.10 here. First draw, first like bet of a draw, right? Negative 1800 on a 1-1 draw between Espanyol and Girona. Pulled the trigger at the 94th after watching odds rise from negative 800 steadily to negative 1800 as time expired. But like from negative 800 to negative 1800, in between that is its own opportunity, right? So how could you just potentially like snipe that more aggressively, but then simultaneously like needing to see that before engaging in the first place? So yeah, bet 18 here, negative 2500 on FC Famalicão to hold the 1-0 lead. Pulled the trigger at 86.22 after watching the odds rise from negative 1800 to negative 2500. So there's obviously a pattern here. I am going to take a quick break. All right, next day here, 311, negative 2500. Pulled the trigger after the 86 minute. Bet 20 here. Negative 1600 on Corbina to hold the 3-2 lead. Pulled the trigger at the 88. Pulled the trigger at 88.30. Bet 21. Negative 6,000 on this team to hold the 2-0 lead. Pulled the trigger at the 79th simply because they were so favored and simply because this was already so high. After, like if it's a sure thing, if there's that multi-point lead, there's that point where the money line is essentially no longer offered, and it could and that could have occurred like in theory in the next couple of minutes, right? And so that could be its own like situation, right? Understanding that that could happen, so we might as well engage it, potentially allowing for this like longer bet, and even that like wasn't even that long. It was only a 15-minute soccer bet. Like that's not that long. Some of these have been like 10 minutes still, right? Either way, bet 22 here on Greek Sport. Won first set 7-6 up 2-1 30-0 when I pulled the trigger. Opponent showing signs of psychological frustration. 10 minutes later or so, while watching it began to rain 4-1 40-0, probably delayed. As of delay, Greek Sport is favored negative 20,000. Pretty fascinating, right? Then it obviously, ends up panning out. So this is not like an hour-long bet. This is like a day-long bet, if you will. So that's that final bet of that, day. Next day, 312 here. Negative 1,200 on a 0-0 tie between Blah and Blah. Pulled the trigger at 88. Very interesting observation here at 11:19. A couple hours later. Had an intuition that Blah 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 versus NS Mura wouldn't finish 1-1. It did, in fact, end 2-1. And so these soccer games could like shift late game, and that's obviously the risk. potentially worth watching? What would you need to see like on the screen? What would you need to see intra game? What would you need to like see in the like literally in the soccer game itself to potentially like filter out those as well? So yeah, final bet here of the campaign, negative 550 on a draw between these two obscure teams. Pull the trigger at the 90th as the odds rose from negative 500 to negative 550. So obviously the odds don't rise as much. Um, and yeah, kind of its own consideration there. So that's the end of that campaign. Capital 247.14. So taking that 70 and running it up to that. So again, another sample campaign. So it's the end of the March campaign 1 here. Then we're on to March campaign 2 where we put in the 1500, right? Wait, that's March campaign 3. What? Where's March campaign 2? Okay, I'm gonna make a part 2.